this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. My Lord, I love history. If I thought that I could have made a living at it, I think my dream job probably would have been to have been a history professor. Nowadays, there's just too much politics attached to it. But I love going to historic sites because you go there and you see things and it breathes life into those that are long since dead. A few years ago, I had an opportunity for the very first time in my adult life to visit Philadelphia. And the reason I really wanted to go was all about Ben Franklin. He's probably my favorite character from American history. I love his story. I love the fact that he was living on the streets in the freezing cold in Boston and then in Philly, and he just kind of set his own rules, man, lived his life. But one of the most interesting things that I saw in Philly was not, Constitutional Hall or even the Liberty Bell, which was kind of cool. The coolest thing I saw was the site of Ben Franklin's privy, which I was fascinated by. And it's just a big block of stone that says that Ben Franklin's privy was here. And privy, for those that don't know, that's essentially the outhouse. But what they did when they excavated that spot, they found all manner of items. And there's actually a display case that actually shows these items that were pulled from the privy of this brilliant man. And I don't know, one side is, forgive me for being coarse here, I thought, how many thoughts did he have during those periods of time when he felt nature's call? And he's sitting out there in the cold, but just considering life. But contained within that privy were bits of evidence of life. Porcelain dolls, broken crockery and pottery, utensils, buttons, just tons of stuff. Can you imagine? And there are people that do this, that go out and dig up old privies and dig through and try to find what still remains. It's a great area to preserve things in. But recently there was a find in a well, not too dissimilar from a privy, an old abandoned well, where something else was found. Something that goes back years and years. Matter of fact, it was a person. And our dear friends at Othram Labs helped solve a 100-year plus mystery. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I went to Philly for the very first time. A place I have never been, and I've had many friends up there that have asked me to come, is Canada. I've never been to Canada. There are a few sites that I've always wanted to go to. I've always wanted to go to see Quebec City, which is like this. It's upriver from Montreal. It's like one of the original settlements that the French had up there. And this place is so beautiful, cobblestone streets. It sits high on bluffs, and it's literally like stepping back in time. But I got to tell you, I've never been, the town of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan has never been on my bucket list. But boy, Dave, did they find something interesting down an old well in Saskatoon?
It's funny. You get these guys that are working at the site of where a hotel had been, and they're clearing it out to build something else. And they come across an old well, and they start digging. And in the well, not all the way at the bottom, but in the well, they find a barrel. And the barrel is hung up. And so I don't know the process that construction workers go through when they find something like this,
Yeah.
But I do know that they don't just start willy-nilly knocking stuff down. They are aware that this could mean something. So they stop
right.
and they reach out. Sure enough, inside this barrel in 2006 is a burlap bag. And again, burlap bag inside a barrel that's down a well. And inside the burlap bag, the well-preserved remains of a female. As they start looking at this, they're going, okay, this is not recent. All right. Now, I don't know, and I'm hoping you can fill me in here, because my first thought was, if I'm a construction guy and you got decomposed remains, now, when we say fairly well preserved, for the fact that they are fairly decomposed, you know, I'm just wondering, how do you come to how old are these remains? I mean, am I looking at something that, even if it's all bones, there's still some clothing and hair, and there's all kinds of things in here. And I'm just wondering, where do you start? Where do you start with a body in a well, Joe?
You start with the barrel, I think. And okay, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
When's the last time you actually came across a barrel that other than former whiskey barrels that have been from Jack Daniel's distillery or whatever, that have been cut in two, and they've got that great bourbon smell to them inside, and people use them as planters in their yard? I got to confess something. I've never seen like a barrel for utility at this stage in my life. I think I recall seeing them, and they were really old when I saw them when I was a kid in a feed store that my grandpa used to go to, that I would go, we'd buy stuff for his horses and his mules and whatnot. I'd seen them there, but there's a particular way that barrels were manufactured and made. I'm assuming that there is some type of identifying mark on this thing somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to also assume that it was essentially cobbled together with nails. All right. And you've probably got two bands that go around the outside to kind of hold it in here. This wood has been specially treated to form it into a barrel-like shape. These things are not like straight up and down like a perfect cylinder. They have almost like a bowfin construction to them. When I say bowfin, that's a ballistic reference to the way projectiles are actually shaped, where it kind of tapers at the end, but this tapers on the top. Was the lid still there? Because those are going to have nails in it, and that's the way, or I guess they could use wooden pegs, but I think that by the time, and we're going to get to time here, by the time this period rolls around, you're going to be using probably iron nails in here. You're not going to be using aluminum nails. And I'm fascinated by this, the ability for something, particularly something that is organic like this, a human remain, that it would be this well preserved in this environment. And not only that, I was thinking about something else that you said. You said that the barrel had not gone all the way down. The measurement that they give is actually 2 meters down. And for those that don't work in the metric system, 2 meters is essentially just over 6 feet in depth. Right. So I'm roughly 6 feet. It all depends on which liquor store I'm walking out of. They catch me on camera with the, with the measuring tape at the door. That's a joke. Insert laughter here, laugh track. But anyway, when you walk out 6 feet tall, I don't know, not necessarily an average size man, but it ain't that deep. A lot
of guys when they walk out of a liquor store, Joe, are 10 feet tall and bulletproof. So
they think they are.
Feet, I'm with you. Yeah. It is kind of, you're only talking 6 feet down the well, a barrel with a body inside. Obviously, somebody did not want this body found.
Right.
But, yeah. And they were successful enough that it's 2006 before we even know there is a body, and they have to call an excavation team out. That's the part that got me. I'm like, where does that even begin?
I think it got lodged. And I'd also like to know something that has not been revealed is the composition of the walls of this thing. If there is like almost maybe, I guess it could be brick or maybe cobblestone that is built in a cylinder essentially around. You know, Dave, this is my thought. We need to know the diameter of the well itself to get an idea. And, you know, we kind of got it in our mind, I think. I really wonder if the thing had been lower in the well over the years, and as the water table rose, that maybe it floated up and then got, here's a technical term here, wompy jawed in there, and got, you know, kind of in a diagonal posture, and maybe it was caught on one end and the top end, it kind of got wedged, and maybe the water table never rose high again enough and receded enough to bring it down to the bottom. These are fascinating perspectives, and yeah, you know, you're right. When you find something like this, and a tip of the cap to the construction workers that they stopped. Right. I got to tell you, I'm going to chase a rabbit here just for a second. Please indulge me. But one of the most, I don't know, tragic stories, I think, that is from around the area where we live in the community of Oxford, Alabama, is when they were building a strip mall. And you probably remember this story. They went into an area behind where the strip mall is being torn down. They never consulted an archaeologist. And Dave, remember, they tore in to the hill. I mean, cut this thing, and this thing is massive, cut this thing in half. And Dave, it was a Native American mound. Yep. Can you imagine that? And so, you know, retrospectively, the Creek Nation, who, you know, essentially occupied this area, they're kind of upset about this, you know, and no telling how many ancestral remains, artifacts. It would have been really rich. You could learn a lot about the area. That's gone, man. So now you've got it. You're using this as backfill dirt so that you can build a Ross's or TJ Maxx or Target, which all exist in this mall, the strip mall. Was it really worth it? I mean, couldn't you brought dirt in from somewhere else? But in this case, they actually paused and said, you know what? We probably need to get a hold of the authorities. There's probably going to have to be an archaeologist that's going to come out there. And lo and behold, that's what happened, Dave.
They got a forensic anthropologist. I love that.
Did. Yeah, I know. Isn't that cool? Yeah. And this guy is actually pretty renowned. He's been practicing for a long time. He's been at the University of Saskatchewan for a protracted period of time. They've got a lot of indigenous remains that he examines, but he's a forensic anthropologist. So he's handling also homicide cases, burned bodies, buried bodies, clandestine graves, all these sorts of things, all through that region and probably all over Canada. I mean, this guy got his PhD in 1979. He's been in the field for a little while.
Right now,
and so
his name is Ernie Walker, okay? His name is Ernie Walker. And the first thing I thought of, Joe, was when we were talking one day on the show about how you find a forensic anthropologist or a person of this expertise, because the police just don't have them in a Rolodex. You know, you don't. No. It makes it. You think they do. I mean, I did until you told me they didn't. I really did. I thought just kind of assumed that there's this, you know.
Let me see.
No, I just didn't know that it wasn't.
Allow me to redirect.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I just didn't know.
No. This is, and people don't understand this. I tell my kids all the time at university, look, when you get out into practice, you need to identify where there is a forensic odontologist, a dentist, forensic anthropologist, a forensic entomologist, because it's like you don't want to have the need for one of these people on the day that you discover something. You need to go out and buy them coffee, you know, when you settle into your desk, and establish a relationship with them. Say, hey, doc, you know what? We might need you at some point in time. Can I get your contact information? Just can we develop a relationship? And Saskatoon is a rather large city by Canadian standards. It's up in an isolated area, but rather isolated. But, you know, you've got this guy that's there. He has availability. You're going to want to bring him in on this, because let's face it, you can have all the forensic pathologists that you want. All right. But when you're talking about human remains that have been down there for, I don't know, roughly close to a century, we think. All right. Dude, you're going to want somebody that deals in something other than still viable tissue or even decomposing tissue. You're going to have somebody that's going to be able to read skeletal remains. And boy, did he do a bang up job, Dave.
You know, when I think about that, I'm thinking about somebody who is working with very sharp, small instruments. Okay. Almost dainty. That's what I picture. But then this is what he said.
Yeah.
Ernie Walker said, my colleagues and I used heavy equipment, did some excavation around the well, and took it apart board by board. And here's the kicker to what Ernie Walker, the forensic anthropologist, I'm thinking a forensic anthropologist on an excavator. Okay. That's what I'm picturing him on this big yellow Tonka toy, but then going from this huge machine to board by board,
inch by inch. Yeah.
And he says, unknown to the individual that dropped it, a piece of cribbing of the well had broken loose and blocked the barrel from going all the way down to the bottom.
Holy smokes. What are the odds? Okay, here's another question for you. If it had not been caught up on that cribbing, all right, I wonder if they would have found it. Or if it would have just been down there and they would have just eradicated it, with excavators. You go, hey, let me give you another good example of using an excavator at a scene where you know that you have a body. You remember our episode of Richard III, the king that was killed, and the king in the car park, remember? Yeah. They started out with front end loaders out there tearing, because they had to tear that car park to pieces. And you have to have a sensibility about you as a scientist. Say, okay, boys, shut her down. Hand me my pick. Hand me my shovel. Then after you get done in the pick and shovel phase and the sifter phase, okay, hand me my dental tools now and my tiny little brush. All right. So it kind of works this way, but that's why these people go through such intense training throughout their life. That's why, and it's not just the training. It's like getting in a batting cage or swinging a golf club. It's practice, practice, practice. You learn to understand what you're dealing with. You have to understand the geology as well as the geography, the topography. Something that I talk about in my clandestine burials class, Dave, is also hydrology. Hydrology plays a huge role in this case. The movement of water over an area, how it affects, how many, over a century, how many times has Saskatoon flooded? How many times has the water table risen and dropped? And have there been sewer lines that have been laid in around this thing over the years? This is a time when we get to the specific date. This is a time where, people didn't have indoor plumbing. We got a well, right? You got to go out and pump the water out of the well. My grandmother used to tell me about that. Oh, you go out to, you have to go out to the, to the outhouse to use the privy. Okay. You're not going in the house. So you've got to have sewer lines and water lines and all that stuff. Did that affect anything in this environment? And so you have all of these considerations running through your mind. You've got the stratification of dirt, multiple layers in there, and just to be able to work your way through it. But the one saving grace here, and I'm going to use this term because I dropped it on you a few moments ago, is that this body was not in a vault or in a mausoleum. It wasn't even in a casket. It was in an old oaken barrel, dropped down a well, but yet it was still what we refer to as an entombment. Okay, so Dave, I'm going to go ahead and tell our friends something about myself. I am obviously a longstanding masochist, and here's why.
This is not the dating game, and I'm not Jim Lang. So,
well, I'm a masochist in the sense that I'm a Saints fan.
oh, okay.
I'm a long-standing Saints fan, and I don't care how bad my boys play. I don't care if they're in the cellar, which they are right now, or Drew Brees is leading them to the 2009 Super Bowl. I don't care. I am faithful to the core when it comes to my Saints. I love them. I love my hometown, and I love that team.
I love Chuck Muncie when he played for the Saints.
Oh boy, yeah, wearing the glasses. Yeah, wasn't that something? And Kenny Stabler actually finished his career.
Yeah.
Couldn't walk. They had to drain fluid off of his knees. Never went through contact practice. That's how bad a shape he was in. Wow. Don't get me started. I know all the history. My mother was actually at the first Saints home game, and on the kickoff, they were playing the Los Angeles Rams. The Saints received the kickoff, and maybe this is a bad thing, but their first kickoff that they received, they ran it back for a touchdown. That's how their franchise established itself, and then it all just kind of went, flew into the side of the mountain at that point in time. Wow. But the thing about it is, the reason I brought up the Saints, I have got I don't know if you have one of these. I'm pretty sure you do because you're a dude. If you go into your chest of drawers, there's probably a T-shirt that out of all the T-shirts that you possess, it's old, it's ratty, but it's soft. And it's one of these things that I don't know. I've got this T-shirt that is ancient. It's a Saint shirt. And for some reason, I can put this thing on and I just feel comforted by it. Now, I don't know if it would require a forensic archivist, clothing archivist to date this. Probably not. But in this particular case in Saskatoon, they brought in a forensic clothing expert, which is fascinating to me. Absolutely.
This sounds like somebody that would work in Hollywood on movies or something.
It really does. It really does. And I would assume that within that field, there's utility for that. If you're going to do costuming, you're doing period pieces. Right. These people have to understand how people dressed. I hate these movies where they try to portray people in older in ancient ages, and they put them in inaccurate costumes. And I know accurate costumes are probably very expensive, but in this case, they brought this person in when they discovered that they had remains that they're dealing with. They just to date the clothing to try to understand the circa of the clothing. What was the origin of it? And not only was there attire that was still remaining, but Dave, they also had a burlap bag, which I think plays in to the narrative of this case.
Okay. Well, all right. So we've got a body or remains in a burlap bag inside a barrel thrown down a well that didn't make it all the way to the bottom. They get it out, and as we documented, excavating and then board by board and pulling it out. Do you take the body then out? What do you do? I mean, I'm going to assume they're not leaving this barrel hanging there, that at some point they've pulled the body out, the remains out of the barrel. How did they get the barrel out of the ground and then get the remains? And where do they take them? They're not going to do an autopsy or look at it. They're spread out on the grass.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go this way with you.
Okay.
Let me just tell you how Joseph Scott Morgan would do it. All right. Okay. And I can't guarantee that they did it this way. And the watchword here is containment.
Right. Yeah.
If you have a vessel, which we're going to call this barrel a vessel, right, and that just means a container of something. If you have this vessel that the body has been contained in, and apparently has been contained in for a long, long time, I'm not going to do anything to disrupt the remains any more than I have to. Now, the question is, had this thing completely fallen apart? Was it still partially together? Because even the components of that barrel, from a forensic standpoint, each component that may have fallen away, went deeper, has got value. It's, in this case is no different than any other case. You have to collect every bit of evidence. And I want to tell you a real quick story about being in a space like this. One of the most terrifying cases I have ever worked. And when I say terrifying, it had nothing to do with the actual remains, like it was some kind of scary thing. It wasn't monsters or anything like this. There was a case in Atlanta years ago where the city came by and they were inspecting either gas or water lines in a particular area. And they had an indication that there was a manhole beneath the surface of the street. And this thing had been, and I think this is completely forbidden, but they still did it. This thing, we calculated the thing had been asphalted over at least 7 times. So these guys, they had to break through that strata of asphalt, and then they found the manhole cover. Well, they popped it off, and guess what? There was a woman's body in the bottom of this manhole, and it had been dismembered and placed into plastic bags. Plastic still existed. I had to go down in this thing. And the scary thing about going down into a manhole, other than if you're claustrophobic, it's not a cool place to be, is that, the lower you descend in this thing, the less oxygen there is. And there have been people that have gone into these things and suffocated before, even with a lid open on this thing. So I was like, and I had this in the back of my mind, listen, if there's anybody out there that can work up a worst case scenario, I'm chief among sinners. My wife says I've got a mind that has an incalculable amount of trivia. It's because I read all the time. I'd be great on a trivia team. But, I'd read, over the years about these sorts of things. And there are cases out there where people have had to go into manholes. Manholes over the years have been a great, well, I'll say great, that's not a good word to use, have been a preferred location, particularly in big cities, for dumping bodies. Because the course of nature is just going to take over. The body's going to break down, and they'll just slap the lid on top of it. And particularly if they're aware of the manhole and the location of it, and they know that if they live around the area, they know nobody ever comes out here. I don't ever see work crews out here. I've got it. I've killed somebody. I'm going to dump them down into this manhole. And so for me, that was terrifying. And that was a really painstaking thing. We did not have an anthropologist out there. Did
you have to go in head first? Did they hold you by your put a rope around your feet and drag you down? I mean, no. All I'm thinking is halfway down there, you had to be cussing going, I went to so many years of college to avoid this kind of work. Isn't there somebody else, anybody that can come down here?
There was something that was kind of intellectually stimulating about it, I have to say, because and again, it's being a death investigator. The odd road of a death investigator is going to take you to many unique locations along your journey. And that's just one of them. For me, it was. And I hadn't really thought about that until we started chatting. But collecting those remains, because those bags had actually erupted down there and had torn over a period of time. But it was in this real kind of mucky, muddy bottom down there, and you could actually see the little turn valves. They were still there. They're made out of, I don't know, cast iron or aluminum or something, where you could go down there and manage like whatever pipes were going through this area. Shows you how much I know about plumbing. But, to be able to access all the stuff down there. And when this body in the bottom of this thing had landed, you could tell it was like it impacted really hard. I think that probably the bag initially got torn by the initial drop. Wow. That's why the case up in Saskatoon is kind of interesting, because if this thing got cockeyed going down the well, dude, this thing may have been preserved to a great degree. And they're actually saying the body was in a barrel. So do you still have containment with the remains? And the barrel is the structural integrity of this thing has not been compromised to the point where you couldn't maybe remove it in one piece. Now, for all I know, they went in and did, but the problem is if you take that body out of that barrel, if you take it out of the barrel, there are so many fine components of the human skeleton that you start losing the bones of the hands, the bones of the feet really, really quickly. And don't even get me started on vertebral bodies. Oh, and by the way, what's really important, the hyoid bone.
Right.
The fact that you would have a preserved, perhaps historic hyoid bone still in place, because that's something you can actually appreciate. That might give you clues.
I want to ask you something as we're talking about this in the well in the body. And we know it's old. We don't know how old. They're trying to figure this out. And you mentioned the forensic coming in and looking at the clothing and the threads and the things like that and having that type of expertise. You told me about the case of Huey P. Long.
Yeah.
And and how that came into play with that as well, with that type of forensic thread count. I mean, I don't even know where to begin.
Listen, I knew nothing. Listen, I've got to proclaim my ignorance here. And I was a very young investigator when this happened. There was a guy named Bill Stars. If you get a chance, check him out. I think Dr. Stars or Professor Stars has passed on now. He was at George Washington University. He did the exhumation on Huey P. Long's assassin, who's a guy named Dr. Weiss. If you don't know who Huey P. Long was, he was a populist governor in Louisiana, and he was assassinated in the hallway, in the main hallway in the old Capitol building in Baton Rouge. And this guy had a beef with him. Dr. Weiss did. As a matter of fact, they think that Huey may have actually been shot by one of his bodyguards by accident. But Huey, I think, if I remember correctly, Weiss had a compact pocket 32 caliber automatic, which you don't come across those very often anymore. And he shot Governor Long and struck him in the abdomen. He lingered for a few days, but they killed Weiss, graveyard dead. Well, the family had questions about the specific injuries. Also, they wanted to know if it was actually Weiss in the grave, because there was all kinds of political intrigue back then. But Bill Stars also did something else famous that you might be aware of, Dave. And I wasn't part of this. I wish I could have been. He exhumed Jesse James's body. And he's the one that actually proved that Jesse James was, in fact, buried in his grave.
Wow.
And you can see those images. Now, listen, it's nothing. I mean, go online. You can look it up and see the exhumation of Jesse James. It's out there in our Professor Stars. And Professor Stars got involved in a lot of these. Well, he gets involved in the Huey P. Long case. And I'm a very young death investigator. And we brought some of those remains, I think, back to our facility where I was working in Metro New Orleans, and did some imaging and things like that. But the person I was fascinated by is they had this lady that worked for the Smithsonian, and this was her job. Her job was examining clothing, and they brought her in on the Weiss case to examine, Weiss's clothing. And she was looking for things like, well, obviously manufacturer markers, thread counts, was there any type of blend, relative to the clothing? Were there any types of special dyes that were used? Because they're going to go if you're going to go to the trouble to dig up somebody, you're going to have all hands on deck, because there's a lot of eyes on this. I remember at the time, the news media was in a frenzy in the state of Louisiana. It was a big deal. But they actually used one of these people in this case in Saskatoon, where they bring in this clothing archivist who's got apparently a background in forensics. And here we're dealing with a body that is completely unidentified. Weiss, you kind of knew that it was going to be him, but in this case, you don't know what you're dealing with, dude. You have no idea. So every bit of data that you can glean, by the way, being contained not just in a barrel, but actually in a burlap sack. And for folks that don't know what burlap is, it's actually made out of the jute plant, Jute, and it's very resilient. As a matter of fact, for any biblical scholar, you don't have to be a scholar, you may have read about the term of people that they talk about grieving. There's a couple of verses in the Bible that talk about putting on sackcloth and ashes. Well, sackcloth is actually burlap. And you mentioned something. I'll go ahead and let you say this. There's a modern case right now that's in the news that actually involves burlap as well. And Dave, take it away. Which case is that?
is that the crazy one we've been dealing with out there on the beach forever.
Yeah,
The
in
Long
Gilgo
Island,
Beach, man.
the
Lisk,
Gilgo,
man.
yeah, and it's just crazy because that burlap sack thing, they came into play where there was could have been a fisherman because they carry oysters in these things.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
I mean, we actually did an entire episode on where these burlap type sacks could have come from up there because they were found near the bodies or under the bodies or on the bodies. And it's like, I mean, the craziness that goes into covering a case, you have no idea. But the Long Island serial killer, I still haven't found an answer for the burlap sacks that were part of that investigation.
Yeah, and it's really cheap to manufacture. But back then, everybody used burlap. I mean, you would put feed in there.
Mm-hmm.
You would put corn in there, flour. You can imagine, and they're very resilient, just like hemp is very resilient. You use these naturally occurring fibers, and it would last a long, long time. And and I'm thinking about this case. Why would somebody essentially, and they didn't, mind you, Dave, they did not say this body was wrapped in burlap. They said this lady was placed into a burlap sack and then placed into a barrel. Why not just place her into a barrel? Why use a sack? I wonder if the sack was intended for maybe absorption, or maybe to mask something, or is the individual so intimately involved with the person? We've talked about this before. As grotesque as this is, was this some kind of weird death shroud? Like, they're memorializing the dead. That goes to a personal relationship, right? That you would take this much time, and by the way, commit a homicide and take this much time with an individual, place them into a sack, place them into a barrel, I guess, nail down the lid of the barrel, walk out to a well on this property at the hotel, right? And just drop it down in there and walk away from it. It's a fascinating dynamic looking back at it. Look, if you're an investigator and you show up at a scene and there's an abandoned well, you got a body in a barrel, the body in the barrel is encased in a sack. Because the anthropologist tells you that this is a female. They're thinking she's maybe in her early 30s to mid 30s. And we can get into that, how they would determine that. But they're also seeing what has been noted as fatal trauma to her body. Well, if you're saying fatal trauma, you're not looking for, at this point in time, you're not looking for contusions or bruises on the body. They're seeing something, Dave, on the skeleton that gives you an idea that this lady was subjected to pretty brutal violence, I think. In this case, what kind of fatal trauma can you identify on a body? And they give the indication that this is some kind of repeated trauma. So I'm thinking that this is evidenced on the skull, more than likely.
Okay.
Again, that's a very, I was talking about memorialization. This is an intimate thing, because if this was like a bludgeoning, that's up close and personal. I always talk about that, how bludgeonings and sharp force injuries are, it's intimate. There's no way to get past it. It's very, very intimate. And bludgeonings in particular are rage filled. So who could a 30-something-year-old woman aggravate to the point where they're going to start striking her multiple times on the head to the point where they're going to kill her? I think that's a big question here. And, you can look at things in the modern sense and say, well, if you can do that and you can attach, the idea of the intimacy, you begin to narrow down the field as far as suspects go. But dude, what happens when there's no more suspects? I mean, because look, she's been gone a long, long time. Who out there could have had anything to do with her demise if they're not still living and breathing? How are you going to track this down? And that's one of the big things that these investigators are faced with, Dave.
and they still have to identify who the victim is. They still don't know who she is. And for all these years, nearly 20 years, okay, we don't, they just called her the woman in the well. And it was this past July. Okay. Now that's how fast this moved. Our friends at Othram have been able to use their abilities.
Yeah.
And I would hope everyone that has certain abilities, certain mental ability or whatever your ability in life is, I hope and pray that if you have something that is so special and so specific, that you actually do use it for good. Because without the work they're doing, we wouldn't know so many things. This woman would not have a name. She has a name now. By the way, Joe, none of her family, none of her descendants knew anything. And we now know she was born in 1881, one of 5 children and she was born in Michigan in the U.S. In 1902, she moved to Duluth, Minnesota with her mother and 2 brothers. A marriage certificate shows that she married Charles Spence in St. Louis, Minnesota in 1904. So at the age of 23, she marries Charles Spence and gives birth to their daughter, Idella, in 1905. February 1916, Alice gives birth to a daughter who died that same day. The 1916 census shows Alice, Charles, and Idella living in Saskatoon. By the way, they moved to Saskatoon in 1913. I meant to say that. Apologize. So they moved from Minnesota or from Michigan to Canada in 1913. 1916. The census shows Alice, Charles, and Idella living in Saskatoon. Now, there's a newspaper article that came out in 1918 that details how the Spence house was destroyed by fire while the family was away.
Oh.
In 1921, Joe, the census lists Charles as living with his daughter, Idella, and a housekeeper and her son. Charles died of a heart attack in May of 1923. So, let me focus real quick here on Idella, the daughter, born in 1905.
Yeah.
Idella died in 1995 at the age of 90. And all her relatives knew, her granddaughters and her they only knew that Grandma Idella was orphaned at 17. And that's all they knew. She wouldn't talk about anything before she was 17. And when you think of, now, police believe, and this is why the family is like, if we'd only known, because when Idella died, the woman in the well was 11 years away from being found. And the family knew nothing of Idella's mother. They knew nothing of Idella's father because she didn't tell them anything about it. But what we do have is the police telling us between 1916 and 1918, Alice Spence was killed. And based on that fire in the house when they're so away from home, what do you think? Maybe based on the burlap sack being placed. And by the way, they lived a block away from where this well was.
And the well was actually part of an old hotel, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And the well was used by that hotel. So if it's an active well being used, pumping water up out of it, and you drop something down in there, it's not going to be discovered. You put it in a,
unless the actual return on the well is blocked in some way, and apparently, I guess it was never blocked.
No,
you're
apparently
still
not.
drawing water out of it. But here's an interesting thing that the anthropologist brought up, Dave, and I'm fascinated by this aspect, was that he opined that the level of preservation in this body, first off, it was pretty striking, according to him. He said that he felt as though that the level of preservation of the body can be tied directly to both a combination of water and, get this, gasoline that was apparently permeating this area. And I'm thinking, one of the things I'm thinking, I've just been teaching a section in my clandestine burials class about the bog bodies that you find in Denmark and some in Great Britain and other locations. And they're found in peat bogs. Well, that is what's referred to. We all know what aerobics is, like aerobic exercise, taking on oxygen. I wonder if this created almost an aerobic environment that promotes preservation. I'm not saying to a great extent, obviously her soft tissues are probably gone, but he's saying this as a preservative. I'm wondering if the alcohol or the gasoline factors into this. And where's the gasoline? I mean, gasoline is something that has to be refined. It's not just like naturally occurring in that area. Now, you do have petroleum, and I think Saskatchewan is known, as a petroleum producer. Right. I don't know. It's interesting, I think, to speculate about. But the fact that she was, in fact, finally identified, and that they have what sounds like homicidal trauma. One of the things, another aspect of this, Dave, is the Canadian authorities are refusing. They're refusing to name the suspect because, now get this, they say he's not here to defend himself. No kidding. No kidding. Yeah. I would say he's not here to defend himself. And I'm thinking, so I don't know. Maybe their brain stretches much further than that. I just don't understand what considerations there are. But we do have a name of the victim. And of course, on body bags, that's what we're all about. We're about the dead and speaking for the dead. I'm just glad that this was brought to a conclusion by our friends at Othram. And I got to tell you this, and you and I talked about this just a few seconds ago off air, and it's an amazing world that we live in now. It's sometimes it's a very scary place, but technology nowadays is kind of amazing. And we live in a world where sometimes the actual deaths, the cases, they take time to solve. And sometimes those cases, well, they have to catch up with science. And in this case, that's what our friends at Othram employed. If you have an interest in wanting to help a family out there that, like Alice's family, didn't even know who she was, and you want to help them draw a conclusion to a dark secret, maybe get those answers that they've been longing for, check out DNAsolves.com. Visit their website. You can go there and you can contribute. You pick a case, you can help fund this, and they have a trigger point. I think it's roughly $7,000 to $7,000. And if they hit that goal, they'll flip the switch and they'll start the work. But they have them listed there. That's DNAsolves.com. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.